welcome from Johnny and myself. And the agenda, as usual, a warm welcome. We have some updates from KQL land. Our very special guest today, Thomas Naunheim. We have some learning, and as usual, what did you do with KQL this month? I can also tell you that I am in the discussion with Henning Rauch, because as you might know, last month, or actually this month, there was the KQL agency. And we're working hard in getting the winning team to tell something about their journey as well in an upcoming session. Yeah. The winners haven't yet been disclosed, at least from speaking to Henning, that was planned these days. Ideally, I would have loved to bring them, or at least to bring the announcement today, but hasn't reached me yet. So hopefully next time or in an in-between session. Then moving over to the news. So for everybody that likes advanced hunting, stay tuned. In July, we should get 2 additional tables, the CampaignInfo and the FileMaliciousContentInfo. So they relate to Microsoft Defender for Office. For everybody familiar with the Defender for Office Explorer, you might know the campaigns view, as well as the malicious content info that is already in the UI. Should be there in early July. Yeah.
Did you already see it live, Alex? Because in my demo tenant, I have the tables, but they're still empty.
Same for me. So I haven't seen anything coming yet. Hence why the only thing I can talk about is that this is coming, but no demo data. And I wasn't in any private previews, etc. So nothing more I can comment. Just for everybody doing advanced hunting, stay tuned. The announcement was in the admin center. Yeah. Good. Next one. I hope I don't catch you in surprise, Johnny.
Yes. We have compared the KQLbench.com to see there's a new website called KQL.bench.com, and there they compare all the AIs and their the capability to solve certain queries. And they also compared a bit what the users was. Let me just share my screen for a second, as that's much easier to talk about. So basically, KQL bench, and over here is my screen okay? Is it good shared? Or okay, good. So basically what they did is they had a question for it, and they had to ask multiple times to see if the engines could reply in a proper way. And the fun thing is I expected a lot from the newer GPT models, especially the 4.0, but in the end it was a bit low on scoring. And what they did is they had the questions, they asked they reviewed cost versus performance. But there's also the fun thing is above here you have the actual questions, so you can see what the questions were and which model solved it. So it was really fun to see. I'm still hoping for a 75+% model, but I think that will take about a year. So we have another year of KQL Cafe, Alex. But I think at one point AI should be able to do basic queries, and as you can see from the total number of models and how many questions were answered correctly, there's still some good time to go. It's a nice experiment. I'm not sure. Do you know who made this query, Alex? The site?
Not by name. It was actually given to me by an employee who mentioned that a co-student had worked on this, but I'll definitely try to get some more insights.
I found it. It's Joe Muller on fluorine lime.
Okay.
Lime.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Definitely interesting. But yeah, bottom line, and I also saw a comment on Thomas's I think LinkedIn post where someone said, why should I actually still learn KQL if AI is going to do that? And well, I always try to be polite in social media, but I would have answered, yes, of course you still need to do that because honestly, yes, I do use AI a lot, maybe even for inspiration, or I just paste, a JSON file because I'm lazy. But it doesn't always mean that things work. Sometimes you have to give extra explanation, and sometimes it's just hallucinating a little bit. I mean, it's the same with PowerShell. AI sometimes just invents PowerShell commandlets that don't exist. And also, last thing I would like to add, why you should still learn KQL. Well, at least you should know what it can do, right? And then maybe the problem solving can be facilitated and can be speed up by AI. But I guess if you just enter, I mean, you need to know what you need to ask, right? And if you don't know, for example, that KQL can also do geo-IP functions, etc. I mean, how could I ask AI, please help me with a query where I want to look at all these signing logs and I want to know the distance from my home to the IP address, just as a stupid example, but give me an example here, right? So I guess it's still important. Yeah.
Dear chat, are you 100% sure that it's working? Or ask it, hey, if someone would die if you have this wrong, are you still sure? Then it will reply, no, I'm not sure. In a second.
So yeah, I guess we can have a long debate on itself on that. Yeah, but definitely cool to see where AI, a little bit of a related thing, also interesting. Mehmet, who we all know, he asked a cool question recently on LinkedIn, and I'm now going to be super honest with you because in a rush, I even selected the wrong table. Yeah, if you catch me in the wrong moment. I was also, saying, oh yeah, it must be image load events. Bang, there you go. And a few days later, when he reviewed his poll, it's actually not like that. So if you're looking at more information around vulnerable drivers, definitely check out this blog post from Mehmet. Then another worth reading blog post from Sergio, who was recently with us, I believe even last month, and he shared a blog post called Top 10 KQL Queries Every Detection Engineer Should Know. So definitely take a look at that, find inspiration, or maybe KQL queries to go to run in your environment. Then also Henning Rauch published an article around understanding query performance in Kusto. So especially for those that want to go deep and even understand CPU and network traffic, etc., definitely worth to read this article as well. Yeah, again, I haven't found any more info on the interwebs. I'm also using AI to search for news, but I also spend a significant amount of time crawling for interesting bits and bytes myself. But yeah, that's it since the last 2-3 weeks. So with that, I would like to introduce Thomas Naunheim, who's going to speak with us about his KQL journey. So floor is yours, Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks, Alex and Gianni, for having me. It's a great pleasure to be here at KQLCafe. Even it's not really winter time, more time for drinking iced coffee or something like that. But yeah, great to be here. And yeah, a little bit from my background. So my name is Thomas Naunheim. I'm working as a cybersecurity architect at Glucania, and also Microsoft Security MVP. It is hard to say when my KQL journey has started. Sometimes it feels still that I'm on the journey to explore everything in the space, because there's really cool stuff that also has recently introduced or is new functions that you can learn. For my personal background, I have a strong relationship and we really passionate about privileged identity access management. And I was considering that could be a great talk to share some of the stuff that I have been worked on in the last 4 years, some long-term projects, and that could be something that you particularly interested in. Sounds that like a plan for today? Party mode? Okay, perfect. All of the stuff that I will show you here, and I will mainly do some live demos, so no PowerPoint battle with some fancy graphics, all about coding. And you will get all the show notes with details and links, because everything what I will show is available on my GitHub repository. So something that you get as a homework and spending the next days to try out how the queries works in your environment. So let's start with something that was my early path to the whole story. I hope you can see my GitHub repository screen here nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, perfect, because it has some interesting visualization effects on my Mac at the moment. So we are here in my GitHub repo, Azure Privilege IAM. And what I started to do 4 years ago is building a classification model for Entra and also Microsoft Graph. So if you have enough free time, like me, you can go through every role action and all API permissions that exist in Microsoft Graph, and then ask yourself, what is sensitive? What type of services are behind the role actions or behind the permissions? And everything what you can see here is written in a JSON file. And I really like to have a classification model. Maybe you heard about the tiering model that exists since Active Directory days with tier 0, tier 1, tier 2. And that also exists in the cloud with the enterprise access model, where you have control plane, formerly known as tier 0, and that belongs to all of the role permissions or API permissions that can lead into a tenant compromise or can be used to manage your crown jewels, because that are permissions related to identity access management. For example, if you can modify every application in your tenant, you at least have one application with full access to everything or to your Office 365 stuff. And yeah, I did all the classification here, and there's also update mechanism. So I'm checking for any new app roles or directory roles that will be released by Microsoft, and doing the manually work, so no AI driven. Thomas is sitting on his computer and checking what is the impact of the API permission, and then publish that on my repo, having a discussion. So there's also impact for and feedback from the community, because sometimes it's not a hard decision or a hard split between is it tier 0 or tier 1. So it's great to have the discussion with the community. And now what we can do with this classification model. Let's print it and hang it over your bed and remember all the stuff. It's not really a cool thing. So what I built is we have this identity info table. And I guess the identity info table has been also a topic in KQLCafe before. So what is so great about that? We have, for example, information about the users. For example, if you take a look in Sentinel, we have the assigned roles. And therefore, we have the information about permanent or active Entra role that exists for the user. One of the cool thing, and I guess that was also something that raised up in the What's New section in the latest month, was we have some updates in the XDR identity info table, because there's also an identity info table in the Defender in the security portal. And there's a column called Privileged Entra PIM roles. And that includes also eligible Entra roles that exist. Unfortunately, if you take a look on that one, it has a little bit different schema. So it's not quite same from the structure. And you get not really an impression what it means that this guy has global reader, or maybe you have some other Entra roles like, okay, what is this Intune admin, for example? And what I built is to create a privilege identity info. Privilege identity info is a KQL function, and it did a lot of enrichment of this information that exists in the identity info table. And if we are looking now, once again, for this user ADM Tom0, what we can find a more beautiful overview about assigned Entra roles, because now we get a unified view of permanent and eligible roles that exist. And one of the really nice thing, in my point of view, I did some enrichment to the JSON file that exists on my repository. And that excludes, for example, what are the role action that exists for the Intune administrator. And for example, in this case, Intune administrator has been classified as control plane from my point of view. And the reason for that is if we go here to the information, we can see the Intune admin can read BitLocker keys, or the Intune admin is able to modify security groups. And maybe you have a security group that will be used for managing your Azure role assignments. And that could lead into a tenant compromise. And all this information are also part. So you can see explicitly what is the role action in the role Intune admin that makes this role control plane, so tier 0. And you can identify what are the users in your environment that are able, for example, to modify a security group. And with this information and by the KQL function, you can use it really nice for hunting, identify what are the split permissions in your environment. And in combination with the identity info, we get also information, is it, for example, a user with risk level and some other information. For this case, the risk status is remediated, so it has been a user with a risk flag before, but now it's no longer risky. So what do you think? That is a nice one, right? So we can see privileges that exist for roles. But there's one caveat, because identity info in the past was only about users. So what about our big friends in an environment called non-human identities? All the service principal, all the managed identities, where of course everybody knows what are the permissions, who are the owners of the service principal, what are the API permissions. Of course, everybody has a great overview about that one. But let's have a look how we can achieve that. Microsoft introduced a couple of months ago the OAuth app info, and that includes also service principals. For example, we are looking here for the Azure AD Terraform service principal, and this includes also informations, for example, about the API permissions. And there's some cool stuff in the table included. For example, information from MDA app governance, if an API permission is in use or not in use. And there's also a classification model by Microsoft about the privilege level that exists for the API permission. Isn't that cool? So we get also information about the API permission. But let's have a closer look. So for example, when the entries will be created. Similar to identity info table, there's a time range when this identity info table or app info will be updated. For example, in this case, there's at least 7 days between that. Sometimes it's also shorter. So take an eye when this table will be updated. And when I take account of all of my client IDs, I'm coming to the point that I have only 56 applications in my environment, or how it called OAuth2 applications, so that would be reference to service principals. But as I said, service principals are also part of the identity info table. Let's have a look how many service accounts exist. That is the type that identity info is using for service principals in my environment. And that is a little bit more. And if you go to Entra and checking for all the enterprise apps, you will be not surprised that you have really hundreds numbers of service principal, because there's a lot of first-party apps by Microsoft and so on. So it's quite usual that you have this high number. And there's another disadvantage. If we take a look, for example, about the schema, in the identity info table, we have a new column name called criticality level that shows the exposure management asset information. And that is available for users, but not for service principals. So I asked myself, hey, let's do another fancy KQL function. And what I did is I have written a KQL function called workload identity info XDR. A couple of months ago, Fabian was part also as a guest here in this episode and has presented the workload identity info. That is something that we built as an enrichment before Microsoft has ingested the data from MDA app governance and other data sources to the XDR advanced hunting table. But now we have all the information in the XDR advanced hunting table. And this function is now collecting all the data. So from OAuth app info, from identity info, from exposure management, from different tables. And now as a result, we get a holistic view. For example, this service principal with all the information, including verified publisher, what is the home tenant of the app. And now we get information about the API permission, assigned Entra roles, who can authenticate by using this service principal, and also who's owner. Owner is high sensitive, because if you have a critical service principal with high API permission, the owner can create, for example, credentials or trying to add some backdoors to that one. And we get also this information, for example, by exposure management. So if we take a look on the other informations, like for example, what about the assigned Entra roles, we have once again the classification model that I have published as an enrichment, and we have the same one for the API permissions as well. So alongside of Microsoft's classification, it is medium. I figure out that this is more critical, because if an application is able to modify all conditional access policies, hey, come on, that's not medium. That's a really critical service principal API permission. And I like to make sure that this service principal will be strictly monitored. I'm aware who's owner, who has full access to this service principal. So enough showing just the functions. Let's go into KQL and show how everything works. So in total, we are here with around 170 lines of code. So it will be hard to go through every line, but just to make sure that we have some elements that I'm repeatedly using in my queries. So all the enrichment regarding my classification model, regarding, for example, identify first-party apps, this is something what I use by using external data lookups. So everything of my classification model is available on my public repo. Here I'm using some JSON file by Merrill. Merrill has a repo that is triggering and collecting all the first-party apps that exist by Microsoft. And I have also some parameters, so looking for high-sensitive Azure roles as well. For example, if someone has a wildcard of authorization, and then I'm going through the different data sources, identity info, OAuth app info, and collecting the informations and bringing at the end of the day all of the data together. That is overall the idea of this function, also about getting the information from the critical asset management. And at the end of the day, you have this unified view, including who's owner of the application, and so on and so on. So what is really useful? Not only about inventory, we can also create some nice hunting stuff. For example, in this case, I'm using the function to looking for API permissions that exist on control or management plane. So are, from my point of view, privileged API permissions. And they are not really in use. So MDA app governance is showing me, hey, this application is not using the API permission, and it could be a smart idea to remove, for example, the API permission if they are not in use. And for example, now I have a list of my service principals with the app role permissions that exist, my category for my enrichment, for example, this is Exchange related, SharePoint related, and then also my classification model alongside of Microsoft estimation, how risky or how much critical is this API permission. And I think that could be really helpful to get a feeling for your environment. So what are a sensitive service principal? Who's owner of service principal? And one last cool thing that I like to mention here, with exposure management, we have the whole view about relations, like graph-based queries, who is owner, who can impersonate, or what could be a potential attack path. And in this query, I'm using once again the workload identity info and looking for every pipeline that is using the service principal and has Azure roles, so Azure RBAC role permissions, and this Azure role permissions are privileged from my point of view. And now I get here the list once again with the affected assigned Azure roles with information about role is privileged. If we are using Defender CSPM, we have the Entra permissions management behind the scenes. So if Entra permissions management in MDC detects that this role permission is over provisioned or inactive, we get also some information here. And we get also the authenticated by information, and that includes the relation, what is the pipeline that is using the service principal. And now imagine you have a security incident in an Azure DevOps pipeline, and you can enrich from the entity mapping directly the information, hey, exposure management sees the relation to the repo, to the service principal, and you get the information about the Azure roles and the API permissions with the classification, how sensitive they are. So that could be nice to have in your environment. And I run that in an environment with over 50,000 service principal, and the query just took 30 seconds. And that's quite fast to collect all the data from the different RBAC systems. So that could be really nice. And I built some other hunting queries you will find on my repo. For example, this is a query that is looking for the sign-in logs. And every sign-in to an application that is requesting delegated permissions to Microsoft Graph is auditing the delegation scope in the sign-in logs. So what we can see is a sign-in to Azure portal, to GitHub, to Microsoft portals, and what are the app roles that will be a part of the scope. So for example, if you're browsing to the Azure portal, there will be delegates to different API permissions. For example, the Microsoft Graph token includes policy read-write application configuration. And from my point of view, that is, for example, a high sensitive API permission. So maybe not really interesting if you like to understand delegated permissions to an Azure portal, but if you have an admin that sign-ins to a non-Microsoft application, and the non-Microsoft application is requesting delegated permissions, for example, to write your conditional access policies, that could be something that would be interesting to know. And even if you have a risky sign-in session, you like to understand what are the delegated permissions that will be made through the session. And with this query, you get a nice overview about the scope of the API permission, how great is the blast radius, and for example, also if the token is a CAE token, so can be revoked in near real time. So that is another information that you get here. Last but not least, you can build also such queries like this. This is now a list of all the changes that I have been made in Entra from the audit log. And I can see here, these are the operations that I did, for example, updating conditional access policies and so on and so on. And I get also a list hey, this user is identified as control plane and has following sensitive permissions. So you can really compare, is this user already recognized from your point of view as a high critical admin, or is someone modifying parts of the Entra that is not really in focus of this admin? So that could be also really nice for hunting. And the last query that I like to share is taking insights about the Microsoft Graph activity log. And a Microsoft Graph activity log will be used here to get some information about the request calls to Microsoft Graph. And for example, I've got here a consent request that has been made through Microsoft Graph API. And we get also a classification from my repository if this was a sensitive action. I guess yes, if someone gives an admin consent, that should be sensitive. But using exposure management to get also an information if the target object that has been modified is sensitive or not. So for example, if someone is updating a password is sensitive. But if the target object is by exposure management a critical asset, hey, then it's also a sensitive target. And this could be really nice use as an enrichment from my point of view to understand is what happens in your environment and if a user is doing a sensitive task on a sensitive object. And once again, we're taking care on the enrichment that it is part of the query. And just to mention a little bit of the challenges that I had. For example, if you go to exposure management, there's the tenant ID and the AD object ID in one field. And I need, for example, to do some parsing here to get the object ID from the column name. And I had also some enrichment to the Cloud App events table, because the Cloud App events table include, for example, a property called uncommon for user. And so you will find a lot of correlations between activity events in one data source to another one, which could be quite interesting for you because sometimes Microsoft split it interesting information for enrichment in different tables. And in this case, for example, my correlation, my primary key between the graph logs and the Cloud App events was, for example, the operation ID. And there's a lot of stuff in the queries that could help a lot to understand how you build correlations. So enough one direction talk from my point of view. Let's open the mic if you have any questions so far. I'd like to show some of the disadvantages in this current implementation and how I have fixed that with EntraOps. But before we continue, feel free to ask any question if you have. Anyone find this helpful for enrichment?
I always like enrichment to just put it like that because it helps to give some context. I can imagine that you spent probably quite some hours, right, correlating, all those things together. Yeah.
So bring that to the list why you should learn KQL. It is also fun. So not only about we did a better job than AI. It's also a lot of fun and it can be a tough time to figure out how you correlate or parsing stuff. But at the end of the day, if it works, it's a really great feeling. Yeah.
And if I understand your work, the EntraOps or the objective for EntraOps itself, right? It can be used in multiple purposes, right? It can be used to actually assess what you have currently and what would deviate from the golden rule of Thomas, which of course is equal an industry best practice or recommendation, right? But I believe you also use EntraOps to basically enforce things, right? If someone likes to.
Yeah, right. That is something that I can share in a few minutes, but it's really important point that you mentioned. So if you disagree on classification in EntraOps, it's up to you to fork the repository, and it
Yeah,
is super simple to go to the function query and then looking for the data point where I use the JSON, right? And let me check here, and then replacing to your repository, and then you can use your own classification model. So it's
yeah.
quite easy to make your own customization if you like to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Cool.
but at the end of the day, without the classification, even I found it really helpful, and that is something what I missed to show. I built also a unified identity info XDR that brings now everything together. So not only the privilege identity info with the human identities, also about the non-human identity, and having a KQL function that collects all the privilege roles that exist and give you an indicator about is it the regular user on the user access plate, or are there a control plane user, and seeing users alongside of applications are, in my opinion, super helpful, because sometimes you have just an object ID and you have no idea what is this identity. And
Yeah,
then you get now the single view, hey, that are the roles, exposure management things, that is a critical asset, and all the details are just with one function available.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and just as a side note, I just was dealing with managed identities today, and I mean it can be at times really a pain, right? Which GUI to use, is it the name, if it's the object ID, is it the client ID? That already can be confusing. So definitely useful to have some query that
Yeah,
already make all those distinguishments for you. Yeah.
yeah.
I always find myself in, making notes in Notepad when I look at the managed identity to look at all the other object names it might have and to see where, I can find something in a log or in an audit trail that, you can easily get lost with all those IDs, etc. Yeah.
Similar to device objects, right? It's always the one device ID that you have in your clipboard for looking for
Yeah.
something. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure. Okay.
Cool. Let me see in the chat.
Yeah, there was one question from a new PKL newbie question, but I think a really interesting question about the identity info table from the security portal if we do not have Sentinel. Yeah, so identity info table in Sentinel is something that will be generated as part of the UEBA, the User Entity Behavior Analytics, and you can that is fully separated from XDR. In XDR, we have also an identity info table. I guess some of the properties will be ingested by MDI. And for example, the OAuth app info is something that will be ingested by data from MDA app governance. And you get the full information, what I have shown in the demo, if you have the Office 365 connector turned on, if MDI is in place, and you have MDA app governance onboarded. Then you
Yeah.
have the benefit of using the identity info table in the security portal, as far as I know.
And speaking about the identity info table, there is actually, I think we mentioned it last month. So because historically there were those like two tables around in Defender XDR and in Microsoft Sentinel, if you like so. And some attributes were only available in Sentinel. So for example, the assigned groups, group membership, for example, you could only find in Sentinel. But Microsoft made an announcement in the message center last month, that they try to merge this. So basically that we end up with one experience, of course, also in the course of this whole unified SecOps experience. So hopefully soon, it shouldn't matter whether you are in Defender XDR or in Sentinel. I hope I explained that correct. Or do you have any other info on that, Thomas?
No, that's 100% correct. And I guess the group membership is something that is still missing in XDR's identity info. For example, the eligible Entra roles is only available in XDR, so we have On both sides, something that exists, and on the other side, it does not exist. And one interesting point is take care about case sensitivity. For example, account UPN has a different capital letters between both solutions, so can be sometimes hard to switch between both identity info tables.
Yeah, definitely look back. If I did my job correct, we should have some show notes, and I add them to the chat. I think this was in April. Oh, I just noticed I'm already 1 month behind. Shame on me. CustoCon, just another Kusto hacker. Oh yeah, here we go. So if you just look into the chats, there you find the show notes, and there someone in the middle, it was actually already in April. There in the middle you'll find the changes to the identity info table in advanced counting reference.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, what's kind of annoying, but we have to live with that because that's how cloud changes are deployed, right? In waves. So we don't know when it's going to hit your tenant, but when it hits your tenant, you might have some breaking changes you want to take a close look at. Like Thomas gave the example, on the upper lower case, but also on the attributes that are available or aren't available. Or there are, I believe, also some changes because Microsoft now also supports Okta. So there are some additional columns that actually, give you some more context about the IDP provider you're using, etc. Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. Otherwise, I don't see any other questions. Nicola loves your solution enrichment. That's good. Okay. Yeah. I suggest go on.
Yeah, I think we have not enough time to go into details with EntraOps. It is a whole different time needed to go in details to that. But I like to give you some impression about what is the difference or what are the benefits in using own solution like EntraOps over being integrated, because at the moment there are some limitations in the identity info table that I had already fixed with EntraOps during the time when I developed the solution. So first of all, if you use a lot of scoped role assignments, so for example, administrative unit assignment for roles, or a lot of group nesting, especially about the scoping, there's some limited data in identity info, so that will be not covered. And if you get nesting, especially for the eligible roles, there is some visibility in the identity info. You get some nesting and transitive flags, but you don't see what is the membership of the group that is responsible that you get, for example, this role assigned. And also about the status if, for example, you are part of a role assignable group or part of a restricted management AU, there's some limited information if, for example, the object is protected as part of the assignment. And one of the disadvantages also about using identity info, if you have custom roles, which could be sometimes a good idea because of least privilege principle, you can't use the classification model, even also from my point of view, because you don't see each role as action that is part of the role assignment. And so I have no overview what are the role actions that are part of your customized role. So that could be a hard one. And when it comes to visualization, nobody likes to go through all the tables and just building queries the whole day. Sometimes it's nice to have a workbook and visualize everything. There's also some hard jobs to make. And what I try to achieve with EntraOps is having a quite easy deployment, because if you do own data collection, you need to run any pipeline or any worker that collecting all the information from Microsoft Graph. And we need to store the data in Sentinel. And as I mentioned before, together with Fabian Barra, I worked on the PowerShell module called Sentinel Enrichment, which helps you to update a watch list. And all the information that I like to collect about role assignments, that's something that I store in watch lists because it's much easier to handle with a watch list instead of deploying a data collection endpoint, data collection rule, all the overhead with the ingestion pipeline. But there's still one benefit in using custom tables because you can take benefit of historic data. So for example, if you're running EntraOps to collect all the role assignments that exist in your environment, you can, for example, start a retention on the table and, for example, looking back about the historical time, how long it has been, for example, this role assignment or has been any change in the environment. So definitely some pros in using custom tables. What I did with EntraOps, first of all, I'm using the same classification model, basically like on my repository, so defining role actions. But now I'm able to consider the scope because EntraOps is scanning your environment and for each role assignment that exists and consider if the role assignment has been made on the tenant root or, for example, on a particular administrative unit. And then based on the matching, I've got here this whole classification if something is control plane or not. Let's give you an example. If you assign group administrator and you delegate group administrator to an administrative unit, and in this administrative unit, there's just groups without any privilege assignments, then they are just regular security groups without any privileges. So why it should be control plane, even you have no blast radius behind the security group. And with the whole classification model, I'd like to give you another example. So in this case, I have a role called authentication admin, and authentication admin is assigned. And authentication admin, surprisingly for me, every time when I see this example, is that authentication administrator includes also permissions to delete objects and not only reset password, also create, modify authentication methods, and even also restore a deleted object. Maybe that is something that is not really in mind when you heard the word about the authentication admin. And now I can see that this authentication admin role is not assigned to a U with only test users. It's assigned to a U including all the Azure administrators. And then it's definitely tier 0 control plane in my point of view. And with all the attack paths that exist, someone has permissions over there because that is a security group that is part of an Azure role assignment. I take advantage of exposure management and all the classification by exposure management. For example, this is a sensitive Azure role. All the direct or indirect escalation paths will be ingested by EntraOps, and I consider them as a critical asset, and every delegations to these objects are also sensitive. And at the end of the day, all the queries that I made, for example, getting the control plane assets, are part of a KQL query that I'm using as part of the EntraOps pipeline. So a lot of informations, I know, but if you like to start, I really try to make it super simple for you guys. So if you go to EntraOps.com, really happy to have this domain, and EntraOps.com give you an overview about the steps, what you need to do. And I really try to automate the whole DevOps process. So you need just to make a clone of my repository template. And if you have that in mind, for example, then you have something like this. There's the EntraOps config file. And the EntraOps config file, you get some parameters that you need to define. For example, what are the ABAC systems that you like to scan? And here's another advantage of EntraOps over identity info. I'm also considering permissions from identity governance Intune, and also Defender XDR. So I get also role assignments from this RBAC systems. And then you can also define some sensitive Azure roles that you like to scan. So everything can be parameterized here in this JSON file. And at the end of the day, you're running a pipeline with a workload identity federated credential. And this is collecting the data and then using the Sentinel enrichment PowerShell module to push the information to watch lists. And one of the really nice thing about the push pipeline is, if you like, you get also the opportunity to ingest data, for example, the high-value asset table that exists in Sentinel or a VIP user table. So everything can be defined here, what should be in scope and what are the roles that should be considered. And if we go to the EntraOps related watch list, we can see, for example, the high-value assets. And if we go to the high-value assets, we can see, for example, let me show here, automated enrichment. And that has a flag EntraOps. And for example, all the critical assets that has been classified as control plane are also part of the high-value asset table in Sentinel. So I built also synchronization between exposure management and the watch list in Sentinel, which I found is really nice. And also about the VIP users. So any high privileged users in my environment are part of the VIP user table. And you get also the classification from EntraOps that this is a control plane user. And for example, this has a flag that this user might also permissions to our tier, which is a tier breach when it comes to the isolation of the tiering model.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, all this watch list stuff is splitted because of limitations in watch lists. So there's two watch lists called principals and role assignments. This stores core information about the user, role assignments, all the role assignments in a flat hierarchy. And once again, I'm a big fan of KQL functions. I built a parser to bring everything together in one view with the privilege EAM function. And now we get here a unified view about everything. For example, if I go to ADM Tom 0, something that I have showed in the identity info demo, I can see what are the assigned administrative units. I can see if this object is protected. I get all the object IDs that will be owned by the user and what are the owned devices, relation to the regular user account of the admin. And when it comes to role assignments, as you can see, everything is also part of the parser. And finally, to bring everything together, I have built a workbook. Spent many hours. Really, it was a nightmare to start with workbooks, but really happy about the result because now I can look for privileges in my environment, get some beautiful visualizations. What are my sensitive assets here? And for example, if we are looking for and searching for people like principal display name, my favorite, let's see if he's still in charge, James T. Kirk. And James T. Kirk, for example, is a hybrid user. And as a hybrid user, he's part of an identity governance access package delegation because he's owner of the catalog that includes all the role groups for getting tenant management. So what I did is also building a relation that someone is owning an access package, and because he's part of an access package, he can grant himself permissions to a security group that is part of the access package. And the access package at the end of the day leads into the tenant compromise. And you see, for example, also what are the related services. For example, with global admin, you get access to these services in Entra. So you get really a full view about the privileges, not only about standard stuff from the identity info, like who's global admin, you get also indirect role assignments from identity governance and who could also compromise, for example, the role assignable group for a global admin. And I found that's really nice to get a full overview and then looking for who's hybrid in your environment, who is, for example, a management plane user, but has access on control plane. That would be, for example, what I called tier breach before. So this is a regular Azure admin, and this Azure admin has, for example, also application admin permissions. And that is something, for example, that you like not to have in your environment, and getting also the information. This role assignment has been made because he's part of this role group. So really large overview. And we are in a KQL club, and we are always interested in detection engineering. And what you can build based on this data is building, for example, this detection. Someone has added someone as an owner to an application which is on the management plane. So, for example, this is a sensitive app, and now I have detected there has been change in ownership, and the person that has been added as an owner has not the similar permissions like the application. So someone could take over this application and gains higher privileges. And that is something what we can detect here with all the tiering information. Similar to here, someone has added a password on an application on tier 1 management plane, but the actor is just a regular user with user access classification. So once again, that would be a breach in your tier and security architecture. Yeah, so far about EntraOps, and I guess there would be much more to share, but will be definitely a little bit too much for a light coffee talk.
Yeah, but definitely cool stuff. And if I'm not mistaken, you recently gave a demo with our friends at Semperis, right? And I think that's online, right?
Yeah, last year in the US, I had a talk about EntraOps. Yeah.
Yeah, with Guido Glinnemeyer, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Can put that also to the show notes. Give you a
I was not trying to get points from you, but I was just about to watch that last weekend.
Perfect.
yeah, that was I'm liking. Well, a good explanation. Maybe some stuff has changed meanwhile, but it was a good explanation about, let's call it, the foundation of what, the whole reasoning, I believe, behind your EntraOps. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so overall, this tiering model, there's just some recommendations by Microsoft, but no deep technical description how to implement that. And my idea is with EntraOps that you can scan your environment, see maybe some critical assets that you have not in mind about your environment, and then starting to consider how to protect them. And what you mentioned before, I built also an automation. So that means if you add, for example, someone as a global admin, he becomes automatically part of a group and can be protected by conditional access. So there's also automated response part in EntraOps that could be interesting, I feel like, to protect your environment.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah. So I have one little, maybe even troubleshooting question. So we discussed this. Well, we had these assigned roles for a long time in identity info, but that basically was only useful if someone had a permanent activation, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it would lie at you because it will tell you that someone has a role, but it's eligible. And if it was eligible, you wouldn't see it if it wasn't active at the time of when the system took the snapshot, right?
Yeah.
And then, and I'm happy that you confirm all my logical thoughts with yes. So, and then we had this eligible PIM whatever attribute. And there I discovered in about 3 tenants, and I was thinking I was going nuts, so I contacted my friend Nicola Zutter, who I see just had to leave. And I said, Nicola, can you take a look? Because I seem to be always the global admin, or there were always users, global admin. And I was like, okay, either this table is exposing stuff through nested groups and whatsoever that we don't see, because I spent hours trying to, sift through group memberships and whatsoever. Maybe, there was the eternity nesting going on. Do you know about anything about this, about global admin being falsely reported in their table, or?
No, so from my point of view, the quality was quite good. About I'm more concerned about missing role assignments, not about too much role assignments that will be shown in the identity info. As I said before, scope roles are not part, custom roles are not covered yet, and so on. But misleading or wrong information, that is something what I have not seen. The only thing is about the expanding nesting. But if you already double check that there's no nesting or transitive membership, then yeah, it's quite crazy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, it was a couple of months ago, so maybe it was. Yeah, but I thought maybe it rings a bell. Yeah.
One thing that
cool.
works very well about the identity info is as soon, for example, an active assignment or eligible assignment was expired, there's an update in the identity info which is removing the entry or updating the entry, so you get a new recent one with the expired information, and so it's not any more part of the assigned roles. And that works also quite good. So when it comes to the freshness, at least in the Sentinel identity info, it works very well.
Yeah, I think they do update changes to objects within 15 minutes or so. Yeah.
Also about groups, which could be interesting.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Okay, well, I would say there was, well, first of all, beside the topic itself, which is super interesting and important, but yet another good example how KQL has helped to get the job done, right? Be it, I mean, in the end, as we elaborated before, you still need to sift into the details yourself and make up your mind and do all the mapping and understand the data models and understand, where is data coming from and what to correlate with what. But I guess once you have that created that foundation for you, I guess then the other journey started, how do I, bring this all together with KQL, right? And so that it makes sense, and probably also validating the KQL queries versus, I mean, that happens to me, and I'll talk about that in a little moment, but validating basically, well, is KQL still giving me your results back, right? That's sometimes what I see sometimes a little bit the risk. That's why I always try to build very small data sets. And sometimes I even love working in my lab because I know exactly that I only have 7 identities and not 500. So then, it's more easy. It's easier to validate the output of a query as when you have to deal with very large data sets, unless you can kind of downscope them. Yeah.
Definitely, yeah.
Cool. Okay, any questions? Let me see. No one. So yeah, we'll definitely put all the notes in the show notes.
Yep.
And for those that can't wait, it's quite an easy one, right? EntraOps.com. Yeah, super cool stuff. So thanks for explaining that.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, good. Then feel free, of course, to stay. And then I'm gonna bring content back. And then we enter our what have you done this month? Unless, Johnny, do I have an outdated slide?
Yes.
I think we skipped the learn part this month, right?
No, I moved something in.
Oh,
So...
okay. Good. Yeah, and I'm paranoid, so I always take a copy offline.
Cool. So I was thinking I should really do something again this month about the KQL Learn. So I was thinking about doing the Kusto detective thing a bit because the team is still working on it, but let me just sort my screen because I want to share just enough. Where do I have it? Grab me for a second. You have to region. Okay. Okay, so we have this. Sorry for the fuzzing, but okay, should work now. So if we go to the application, and we say region to share. So I think you guys should see my screen now.
Yep.
Wait, this is odd. Now I have two regions. I think it's not sharing the right thing. Share it again. This one is the right one. So, because you should see the deck now, right? The Kusto Detective. And I was thinking about maybe sharing some insights of the first challenge, because it was quite fun to do. So basically what happened in the Kusto Detective agency, there was a attack on the first commercial nuclear fusion reactor. So basically we had to stop them. And to do so, we had several data sets. And the first challenge in the Kusto Detective agency was that there were a group of people who hacked into the plant, and we need to figure out where they were working from. And the first data set which you got was the hacker's log. But the hacker's log was quite complex, and if you finish it, you know that this had nothing to do with the first assignment. So the first assignment was, hey, make sense of these delivery logs, because we had some hackers working at night doing things. So basically, as always, we do take one to see what's in the data. And as you can see in the data, we have orders. So basically, there's an order with an order ID, and there's a order. But because we had a group of people, we of course know it should be more than 5. But what made this thing quite complex was if we do a total set of record count, and we can see that there were in this data set, there were 10 million records. So you couldn't just scroll through the records hoping to find the right thing. You really should use KQL to make sure that you could find things. So I had a team and we were playing, and we thought, let's make sense of it. We know that something happened on a Wednesday. So first we did take the day of the week. So in Kusto, the day of the week starts with 0, ends with 6. So, and we wanted to make sure that we looked at the Wednesdays. So we have Sunday is 0, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday is 3. So basically, we're looking for a set on Wednesdays. And it's still, the data set is too large. So if we go into it, it's still 1.3 million records. So we needed to filter it a bit more. So the next step, what we did was, hey, these guys operated by night. So in the evening, so what we did is we had a time frame between 6 p.m. and midnight, because we have the hour of day, which basically maps it to the before hour. So if it's 4:15, then it maps it to 4. In this case, we use the between operator to make sure that we have all the nightly things. So it's a bit less, still 250,000 records. So we're getting somewhere. So the next step, what we should do is we were thinking, hey, there's a group of people. So if you're with 5 to 8 bad guys, then an order of 2 items doesn't work out. So what you can do is you can start filtering about the items. So basically with a group of people, we thought 10 should be a nice option. So now we're starting to get in the range where we can actually work with data. So in this case, we had 82,000 items. And now we can start to look at the locations, because with the 82,000, it's a bit more easy. You get all the data. So the next step would be to do a count based on the delivery address. So this way we start to do a count on delivery address, and what we noticed was there's one outlier who ordered 54 times during night. So in this case, the answer for the first exercise, it's closed already, so you can't go quickly join and fix it. But the first answer was this street, because due to the filtering, we were figuring out, hey, there was someone there. And also the cool thing about this exercise is really you get to play a lot with the operators. So you combine several ways into figuring out the answer for the first case. I thought, because usually we just do the operators, and I thought it would be nice to just see how it can correlate to solving a case. So that was my item for Learn KQL for this month. Did anyone compete in the competition? Quite silence. Yeah, Jay, it was a bit complex. I have some friends who finished it. I wasn't one of them, I must admit, because due to time constraints, and also we got stuck, I believe on the fifth case where we were overcomplicating things. In the end, we got through it, but it was a good challenge. Exactly, 5 was rough. So that's my small bit about the KQL Cafe, Kusto Detective. And then it's back to you, Alex.
Good, thank you. Yeah. Okay, let me hijack. Good. So what we have we done this month? Well, first one is kind of a more of a funny thing, maybe not so useful, but in Defender TVM, your TVM info tables, we have software inventory data, and we have information about end of life. And there you see, as you can see here, I'm making it a little bit bigger. You basically see, okay, when is the end of support date, the end of support status. And I just thought out of fun, because I wanted to combine, another discipline, basically creating a GitHub action that crawls the support information and the release date of those versions. And actually, as I was geeking around, I even had more ideas like, show me, because normally with Defender, you just get this, right? So software version and the build version, but, what does that mean? So sometimes I'd like to enrich, like Thomas did. And as I went geeking out and found more useful information on the official Microsoft Office release info by date page, I started scraping that info, and you find all the details about that GitHub action that is running, so you can copy it and modify the Python script as you like. But basically, I'm also creating a CSV file that I then use in this KQL query, which I can quickly share. Give me a second. If it wants to do that. Yeah, okay. And let me quickly do this sharing ping pong. I'm not as good as Johnny yet, although he showed me 1,000 times his region utility. Yeah, so here, basically I was interested to also show the Office deployment channel, because funny enough, when I run this at a customer at several tenants, I noticed that maybe some have a little bit of a mess in actually choosing between the monthly channel and the semi-annual channel. So that was kind of a funny side effect. But I also kind of wanted to simply highlight, showing the date when it was end of life is one thing, but maybe psychologically, telling people like, hey, this was like 5 years ago, or 3 years ago that you should have missed this. So that was kind of the idea of creating a simple table. So yeah, give it a try if you like. Then the next thing I created also has a kind of a funny story. Because, let's put it politically correct, like one of my customers, they had some arguments about who did what. And we all know this, like nobody. But our audit logs never lie. And this was especially around the approval setting that apparently someone had activated. So I thought that's an easy one. And let me share that one, because that also has a funny story. And please, Thomas, don't tell me, because this is the risk sometimes, right? You're reinventing the view, although I usually do some research. So what I did here, by actually going through all that data, I figured that, when you query this, the raw data, that basically all that information about what was changed is kind of put into one attribute. So I ended up basically, where do I do that? I'm basically, trying to parse them and create a proper array of them, because that is then what gives me this nice list. And I'm also working on a workbook, but I already have some ideas, so I'm not going to show it here. You'll find the link to the workbook, of course, in here. So there's a version published, but I already have some cool ideas. The workbook looks very similar to the conditional access change workbook. So you can click on a particular change, and then it will show you also basically this information, what was changed and from where it happened. But speaking about validating the data, I have, for example, noticed, and I might actually update this, because this MV apply is a nice one, but my lesson learned was that if MV apply doesn't give any data back on a record, you're basically going to lose the record. And this is something I hadn't noticed when I would have just ran this at a customer environment, versus in my own environment, where I exactly know how many unproposed changes I made. And then I usually try to count them. I usually even try to make timestamps. So first I set up my lab environment or groups and roles, and I reset everything. And then I really want to make sure, before I send something to the public and say, oh, hey guys, cool, I have a cool query, and then it's lying to you. That's not really good for your reputation. So I already had to remove some of it. I'm pretty 99% sure after running this over a couple of tenants that the IP address is always there. But I'm still not very happy, because in the event that the IP address would not be there, I would lose the whole change record. So I've already been looking into other ways in doing that enrichment, because the IP address was more of a fun fact, like, show me from where the change was made. But of course, more important is to understand, in this case, we have a change on a group, so a PIM-enabled group. But I'm also having the possibility, in this case, I changed a role. And then I see here the role, and I see the modified settings, and I see whether something was disabled or enabled. And that was basically by, looking, first of all, clicking on every possible option in the UI to provoke basically all those changes, and then see what the results would be in your raw logs. So I hope in my first attempt, I got it more or less right. Yeah, so that's a query I created, and here's an example. So if you only want, if you only want to look for specific changes, you basically, can filter it by this. Yeah. So that's my little contribution. Still work in progress, but for this month. And let me see. Yeah, we have another one from Johnny. Yeah.
Let me take the screen again. So go to share. No. Yeah. So basically, I found her some lists about newly updated domain names. Basically, this company provides DNS services where they provide lists of newly registered domains. What I did here was basically merge those two. I did a union. So if we run this, we can see exactly what are all the domains they find. And next, you can compare that to your URL click events or to your device network events. So basically, if you do the device network events, you filter out for empty remote URLs, then only get the host name out of the URL, and then you can compare it. And then you can see if there are any matches in the URLs based on the list. And this is nice because newly registered domains are usually used a lot for attacks. Only disadvantage of this provider is they provide a list for the last week and the last month, which in total contains 14,000 unique records. But that's not the complete list. So if you go to them, they have a separate service where you can get a lot more items. I think at one point there were about 50,000 new domains. But it's good detection. It's nice to see. You can treat it as an informational, so you don't get a lot of issues with your analyst. But it's a nice simple query to enrich your SOC.
So, okay, if I get you right, the one with the 1M, is that the one with the 1 million records or?
No, it's 1 month and 1 week.
Okay, yeah. But the public version is not showing you everything.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, yeah. So there's like a partial detection.
Yeah, exactly. And
yeah.
you know, if this triggers, yeah, it's an extra layer of protection. Because in the end, security is a layered approach. You can't just do one indicator. You want to have it on several points, but it's a nice to have.
Good, good. Alrighty, then I believe with that, for once we are on time, as promised, 1.5 hours. So thank you everyone for joining, but I hate to say this, but I have to, one more thing. Give me 1 second. Oops, Kusto. Okay, so just a kindly reminder, just in case you haven't heard it yet. So this year we will run CustoCon for the second time. This time basically in 2 parts. So we do it on-prem for those that like to join. In the morning session, we'll have a workshop delivered by Johnny and Bert-Jan. And of course, for those joining online, on-prem, they of course are also happily invited to join us in the afternoon. And if you don't want to travel to Zurich, Switzerland, then you are also welcome to join online. So yeah, mark your date. You still have a little bit of time. Here you find the details. Also, big thanks to our sponsors who are supporting us with this. Yeah, and if you like to register, just go here and yeah, be careful. Here's the on-site registration, which goes to Meetup, as well as for the online registration. And of course, spread the word. We have a lot of cool speakers. Let me go there. Blah, 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 blah. Where are they? Here. So we have this year Ugur, who does a lot of KQL. Well, actually, we only him a back thank you because he's basically aggregating all of our KQL GitHub queries into KQLsearch.com. We have Olaf, well known for his threat detection expertise. Henning Rauch from Microsoft. He was with us a few weeks ago, also talking about the whole, I have to correct myself. He facilitated Uli Barash, who was recently here, talking about the whole Kusto Fabric, Microsoft Fabric topic. Bert Young, Matthias, Stefan, all well-known figures in KQL land, and our friend from Greece, Michailos, will be there as well. So yeah, it would be cool to see you, any one of you. Otherwise, our next KQL Cafe session, let's also talk about that briefly. Will be in August. So we have Mona on the call. She also does some awesome stuff with KQL and AI and security. So definitely look at that. And then for October, November, we already have sessions planned as well. So agenda is well booked for the rest of the year. And with that, I wish you a very nice evening, and thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining all.